So I just want to make one correction in my biography. Something that happened yesterday is we adopted a dog. So now my house is feeling very full. I have a cat, a dog, 2 children, and a husband. And I was remarking to my husband last night that the house feels very full with this new presence and this new life. And it's quite an adventure. I've never owned a dog before, so we'll see how it goes. Move this a little higher. I don't want to. There you go. That's a bit better. So a few weeks ago, I was on retreat. Actually, 2 weeks ago, I was on retreat in the Bentonville Pines, and many of you are probably familiar with that. And it was a much-needed respite for me. It was an in-care retreat for seminarians in our southern district here, and I had that experience that Ron was speaking of just the silence being so loud that you could hear the silence. And there's something about that just moves the spirit and refreshes us when we've been spending maybe too much time indoors. So I want to talk to you this morning a little bit about what is this wilderness that Ron speaks of and that we hear our American poets speak of. And I just want to tell you up front, I don't have some great aha moment that you're going to go, that's the ticket. So just be prepared. I have a collection of stories for you about what that journey looks like among various different travelers as we go along in our journey here. I want to start with a story or with an author, Barbara Brown Taylor. Some of you may be familiar with her. She's a prolific writer. She was ordained to be an Episcopalian minister and then left that and is now a teacher and a speaker. And she has quite a lot to say about the role of wilderness in her life. In one of my favorite books of hers, Leaving Church, she writes about this wilderness, and she writes about how this was central to her experience as a child to discover the divine. She says she first came to know the divine in the fields and valleys outside her backyard. She recalls that the divine presence was strongest outdoors and most palpable when she was alone. Again, recalling some of the things Ron was sharing this morning. When she thinks of her first cathedral, she says, "I am back in a field behind my parents' house in Kansas, with every stalk of grass lit up from within. I can hear the entire community of crows, grasshoppers, and tree frogs who belong to this field with me." And she points us to, in that, she points us to something that we all know is true, that there's something special, something rare, and something that we need in the wilderness, that we can't get when we're indoors. Something is called forth and calls us forth in those wild spaces, and it acts as a bit like medicine to our world-weary souls. Barbara Brown Taylor also shares her perspective on what that means for her and her theology. She writes, "If anyone had tried to tell me as a child that creation was fallen and that I should care more for the heaven and earth, I would have gone off to lie in the sweet grass by myself." I find a lot in her writing that really reflects a lot of our Unitarian Universalist call and feeling about needing to care for the earth and for the glory of nature. Creation is blessed and everything is holy. This morning when I shared our reading from John Ruskin, I just want to excerpt that a little bit and say, he writes, "There is religion in everything around us, a calm and holy religion in the unbreathing things in nature." For John Ruskin, as well as for Barbara Taylor, the sacred inhabits every aspect of the world, and our imagination is lit up by that contact. We too become sacred. We recall our sacred nature when we're out in the wilderness. And this going out and coming back from the wilderness is something that we do a lot as Unitarian Universalists. And it turns out that this is not a unique tradition. Every prophetic tradition, from Unitarian Universalism to the Jewish, to the Christian, to the Buddhist, to the Hindu, each of these traditions has within it a respect and a deep sense of reverence for the natural world. And all of their, well, most of their prophets and spiritual leaders such as Moses, the Buddha, Krishna, Jesus, John the Baptist, each of these goes and spends time in the wilderness, and something happens for them when they go to the wilderness. Something finds them. And we're a free faith. You can call that whatever you want. Some people like to call that God. Some people like to call that Mother Nature. Some people like to leave it unnamed. But there is something about that experience which calls us forth, refreshes, and renews. Somehow when we are emptied of the concerns for daily living, something new can come into our hearts and find us. This unnamed, untamed, and unscripted encounter enlivens us. It lets us know what is in the center of our spiritual map as well as what is at the edges